Isaac Woodward, welcome back to The Overlook. We're going to tackle Nick Fuentes and his interview on Tucker Carlson's channel. So this is going to be, I'm sure, very interesting commentary. Do you have any top line notes that you want to make before we just dive into the actual interview?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back, Dominique. Yeah, we hit on the last podcast the topic of Tucker in general, kind of his trend. I think it's important. I would encourage people, if they haven't seen that yet, to watch that first because it's a good preface to go into it.
Mhm.
Because I think one particularly dangerous aspect of this podcast that he did, again, go back to refer to all of that about it's not about free speech. It's not about if he has a right to talk to someone or being canceled. It's about critiquing how he conducted a conversation and how it fits in a trend of anti-American, anti-Semitic, other kind of trends he's been in. But a danger of that is you get a hyper sanitized version of Fuentes. And that said, there's still plenty of crap like we'll go into that's disturbing and off and weird and bad. But compared to, the dozens of clips, and this is extremely accessible. Nobody can claim to be, unaware or on the fence about who Fuentes is as a person once you look into him. Compared to all that, you get a very, very sanitized version. Tucker literally opens the interview basically saying, so a lot of people say stuff about you and throw things around, but I just want to hear from your side, it's
Mhm.
essentially like a flattering profile of a celebrity or sports figure. Tell us who's the real Nick Fuentes. You've been so misunderstood in history, and a lot of nasty things have happened. But how do you feel? What's your story? The most kind of easy softball flattering way to set up someone to tell their own version of their history, their ideas, what they believe, and then that's what you get throughout the interview.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's very, very important for people to note that that's deeply insidious because, in the past, Fuentes and Tucker have feuded. There's a record of them going after each other, including in some nasty ways. So Tucker's not unaware of these things. He's just choosing to let him present the most flattering version of himself. Um, Deeply disturbing. We'll get into the details of why, but I think that's important for people to look at. Nobody can claim it's an oversight, and it should not be viewed in isolation.
No, I completely agree. And before we watch the actual interview, I just want to share this tweet. I think he tweeted it out maybe the day. No, this was after actually the Tucker interview aired. But he said, "This is the civil war." This is Nick Fuentes tweeting inside the GOP. America first versus Israel first, which is, of course, that false dichotomy that the woke right, or whatever you want to call it, this new right, has created, which is we send money to Israel. Therefore, the Jews control everything, and it's America versus Israel first. Let's forget about the fact that they're one of our longest standing allies in the region and that they're the only democracy in the Middle East and that they provide us with an immense amount of intel that is critical for US security. And we have shared security interests. Forget all of that. um, they've created this false dichotomy between the two and the evil Jew. And then that continues. The through line and the next one is Christ the King versus Judeo Christian, which is this idea. I've done videos on the Christ is King. Essentially, that is a supersessionist rally cry or a replacement theology cry, which is that Christianity is completely divorced of Judaism. Forget the fact that we worship a Jewish Messiah. Forget the fact that the need for a Messiah doesn't exist outside of a Jewish context. Forget all of that. And this idea of Judeo-Christian, all Judeo-Christian means is it acknowledges the Old Testament and New Testament heritage, which is the bedrock and foundation of Western thought and Western civilization. This idea that me and you have inalienable rights that are given to us by God, and that those liberties should be protected. That is a Christian idea that doesn't exist outside of the Western world. And if it does, in a modern sense, it's been adopted from that Western idea. So again, it's this false dichotomy that you can't believe in Judeo Christian values because that's propaganda, that the Christians and the Jews are somehow, they share a legacy and a heritage, which is historic. It's wild to me that there's a schism now, essentially based on, do you believe that there's a Jewish heritage to our Christian faith? And then the last one he has is free speech versus cancel culture. And the only reason Nick Fuentes is talking about cancel culture is because people are challenging his really horrific ideas and they can't stand the scrutiny of historic reality or facts. And he's now hiding behind this idea of cancel culture. You can say whatever you want. And we talked about this in the other episode, Isaac, but you can also be challenged on it for sharing really bad ideas. And so Nick Fuentes, who hates women, who claims to be a Christian but says that he was effing TPUSA and that Charlie Kirk was a horrific man and that he actually wasn't a godly or Christian man, or you say you hate the blacks, or you say you hate the Jews, and you're a literal fascist who then also loves Stalin somehow. Yeah, those horrific and horrendous ideas should be ostracized from becoming normal in everyday society. This is something, Isaac, that we didn't touch on in the last podcast we did. But for example, like pedophilia, like you could say really, really horrific things about wanting to have sexual intercourse or exploit young children. You can say that in the public space, but should we allow that, like, on a moral basis and ground? Should that become, like, normal conversation? Absolutely not. So, there are ideas that are so heinous that they should not take, place in society as a common trend, as a common policy position. Ostracizing evil or bad ideas is the beauty of free speech, is that we can put ideas out into the public arena, and based on their merits and based off of the morality of that argument, we can decide if we want that to become mainstream or not. So, again, some things should be taboo. Saying the N word, for example, which Nick Fuentes does, should not
Hmm.
be okay. Like there are some words that should not exist in, you know, everyday American society. And in that sense, this idea that nothing is cancel, like we should be able to cancel anything, I think that is a very toxic and extreme reaction to the cancel culture, or, the idea that language is violence that appeared on the left. The right is now reacting and saying, "Oh, but well, nothing should be canceled. Everything is free speech." And I think that's a really dangerous place to be, especially if you call yourself a Christian. There are ideas that you should not tolerate and that should not be palatable just because free speech exists. Again, you can say whatever you want, but that doesn't have to be accepted as mainstream by the rest of society. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just pause here to insert a content warning. Uh, this is generally a family-friendly podcast. We don't swear on it. It's not, you know, how we tend to speak, and generally like acceptable topics, maybe aside from some October 7th stuff. But this is one where I have two young kids, and based on things we'll reference other stuff that Nick has done and said, I would
Yeah.
shield ears or other things like that, because it's that level of reprehensibility.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I totally agree with your framing. I think it's absurd to act as if it's about free speech or cancel culture. And I'll add here again, I think it's an insidious way of how Tucker just gives him like all of the leeway to frame his own version of a story. You almost get a sense that like, oh, he was a normal guy. He just had a few questions about Israel, and then like people weren't nice to him and canceled him, and then like now this is where he is. But he's basically here. Like he says, he's got a best friend who's Jewish. He says he doesn't want anybody to be hurt or hate or all that. Like, and you kind of think, oh well, even if you're pro-Israel, you could maybe say, well, poor guy, he should have been treated better.
Mhm.
Uh, a few caveats to that. Like we know one of the people involved in the story that he references early on, Cassie Dillon. It's now Cassie Akiva. She's gone through some of our educational programs, is affiliated with the Daily Wire. Um, I will say, I think there is a massive amount of like deception and misrepresentation of how he's kind of framing a very neutral view that he just had a few foreign policy questions about Israel and then was blacklisted, mistreated, all this. I would be willing to bet that there was way more beyond that. There was way more tones of anti-Semitism, all of this stuff. Like basically you have to take him at his word because the record of him online has all of these things. So there's really only two interpretations. This is actually the posture he was coming from. And if you're around people, they're working with you, at one point he was live streaming his own show with this kind of smaller right-wing outlet. You'd have to assume he was keeping all of that hidden, and it wasn't there and people didn't pick up on it. I think probably people did and they got a sense of it. And that's the issue. Because again, if somebody in a clan hood stands up at a TBUSA event and asks a question, maybe it's a legitimate question about, do you think there might be an excessive influence of APAC over American foreign policy? Like, you could ask that question and not be anti-Semitic, but if your tone and your demeanor and your presentation and all that indicate you are clearly racist, anti-Semitic, you're not going to be treated the same as someone who states it neutrally. And
Mhm.
I highly doubt that he didn't actually get adequate answers to what he was being said.
Mhm.
So he kind of tries to give this view as if he was radicalized.
Mhm.
I think he actually did have that
Villain
anti.
origin story. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, he tries to present if he's radicalized. So there's that one potential, which I think he's misrepresenting. I think they wouldn't have just called him anti-Semitic over nothing. Like we've been in conservative circles, even before we worked in pro-Israel stuff. Like people can ask these questions, have these debates, and we don't just leap to that. Um, the other interpretation is he actually was radicalized, which is arguably worse if you're just a perfectly normal movement conservative and you ask a few questions and then you get your, according to his own view, like live stream show with 100 viewers on this minor thing gets canceled because they choose to not run it, like that's your persecution story. And then you go off and do all the horrific things you've done with all the clips, things we can allude to, praising Hitler, praising pedophilia, saying women want to be raped. You can even set aside all the Israel stuff. I'll also say this to viewers that on the fence, neutral, whatever, you could even disagree with our general thrust on this podcast about, the morality of Israel as a state, the value of the alliance, like shared Judeo-Christian heritage. You could theoretically reject that, but any decent conservative cannot look at what Fuentes has done and said and see anything actually conservative ideologically or Christian about his views. That should be one thing. Now, we'll also argue that's not a coincidence. When you go so off the rails in this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel way, it's not a coincidence that your moral compass is utterly wrecked and you go off in these other evil ways.
Mhm.
Like when people implode or get addictions or go way off the rails, it's not just one part of their life that gets messed up.
Yeah.
It's many things. And this deep obsession he has with Jews and hatred goes this way. And I think Tucker, the kinship they found is over this anti-Semitism, this hatred
Yeah.
of Israel. That's why he brings him in. And Tucker, therefore, gives zero pushback to any of his evil and indulges this. So it's
Mhm.
very important to look at that villain story, villain origin story. Even if you want to say he wasn't bad and he was mistreated, if somebody canceling your tiny show makes you go fall in love with Hitler, that's a problem in your own soul. It's not anybody's fault. It's
Talk
like
about fragility. Like,
yeah,
if
exactly.
if your conviction and moral compass is so fragile that someone canceling or someone, like, slightly rejecting you or slightly rejecting your idea and choosing not to platform you makes you a villain, then you're a deeply unstable individual with a very, very deep shame wound that then needs to lash out. And the other thing too is, like, I'm gonna play really quickly, Isaac. Ben Shapiro did an amazing takedown. I'm gonna link it in the description box down below of Tucker and Nick Fuentes and how they were beefing and then now they're kind of aligning. But I want to play before we even get into the actual video of Tucker what Nick Fuentes has said because people, for example, like I'll talk to my dad and my dad's like, "Who is this guy? Like, why is he so bad?" And I think that a lot of people don't know who Nick Fuentes is, your average like MAGA voter. So I want to kind of share some of the things you were saying about pedophilia or about women wanting to be raped and stuff like that. So you can kind of get a sense of who this person is and let him kind of speak for himself because he's quite vile. So let's just really quickly look at this segment that Ben did, and he takes clips from what Nick Fuentes has actually said himself.
That for the most part, Fuentes lives on the radical edge of normality. You would think that if you watched the interview, because Tucker Carlson decided that it was important not only to host Fuentes, but to smooth over his views, water them down, and make them far more palatable to a normal audience. As we'll discuss in a bit, this is what Tucker Carlson does for a living. But back to Nick Fuentes. To understand just what Tucker did here, we must actually examine what Nick Fuentes says on his show, and has said for almost a decade, because he was asked precisely 0 questions about any of what you're about to see by Tucker Carlson. Nick Fuentes says women want to be raped.
A lot of women want to be raped. And when I say raped, I mean like, that sounds bad when I say it like that. But there's like a lot of women that really want a guy to beat the shit out of them. But also they have to pretend, but part of it is they have to pretend like they don't.
Nick Fuentes says that his followers should kill, rape, and die in his name.
Raise your right hand. All right, everybody raise your right hand. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I will kill, rape, and die for Nicholas J. Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes says that women are whores who shouldn't be in politics.
I will continue my crusade against women in politics. It's always like this, and it's so ironic. Women are like, I don't like, when you say, I like, you have to affect the face. When you say to repeal the 19th Amendment, that offends me. That hurts my feelings. It's like, have you ever stopped and considered that maybe if you get offended, there's such a strong emotional reaction to political opinions you disagree with across the board. Maybe that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't be making political decisions. I'm not attacking women. I'm attacking whores. You have no problems, right? I'm attacking whores. I'm attacking sluts, stupid, dirty bitches.
Nick Fuentes says that Jim Crow was actually better for black people.
It was better for them too, number one, but number two, who cares? Who cares? You know, enough with the Jim Crow stuff. Who cares? Oh, they had to drink out of a different water fountain. Big fucking deal. Oh no, they had to go to a different school. Their water fountain in that famous picture was worse. Who cares? Grow up, drink out of the fucking water fountain. It's just water. It's the same. You know, and even if it was bad, who cares? Who cares? It's better. It's better in general. We all agree it's better for them. It's better for us. It's better in general.
Nick Fuentes says that white people are justified in being racist.
Reason that we talk about this, by the way, I know a lot of black people see this and they go, man, why are you always talking about black people, this and that? Because there just needs to be some shame here. Well, there's a few reasons. First, white people are every single bit justified in being racist. Every single bit justified, to the extent that that means going out of your way to avoid black people when you see them.
Nick Fuentes is a Hitler admirer and a Holocaust denier.
Buddy, it's Führer Friday. It is Hitler Friday. Shut up. It is Heil Hitler Friday, nigga. Heil Hitler, all my niggas Nazis.
Hitler was a pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really fucking cool. So, you know, time to grow up. We're not children anymore. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right, boys? Am I right? Let's go. He was also really fucking cool. It doesn't really sound correct to me. Wait a second. It takes 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies, and you have 15 ovens, probably in 4 different kitchens, right? Doing 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years. How long would it take you to make 6 million? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't be 5 years, right? The math doesn't seem to add up there. The math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million, maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies. And I think the Red Cookie Association said something like that, probably 200 to 300,000 cookies baked, probably. And in addition, you know, in this hypothetical, I imagine that if you took aerial photographs over the kitchens, you would need to see certain smokestacks to release the smoke from baking the cookies. And the smokestacks would project certain shadows, but I guess they're not visible in the aerial photographs taken over the kitchens. Moreover, if you look at the soil texture, it's really not deep enough for mass cookie storage underground.
Nick Fuentes believes that the Jews start all the wars, that perfidious Jews in positions of power ought to be killed, and says the Jews are filth who have to be removed from the country.
And once again, remember who is responsible for it all: the Jews. They are responsible for every war in the world. It's not even debatable at this point. This has nothing to do with oil. This has nothing to do with democracy. This has nothing to do with liberal internationalism. We are at war with Iran because they pose a threat to Israel's hegemony. That's why we're bombing their nukes, to pave the way for regime change so Israel can dominate the region, because that makes them the most powerful they can be.
There is an occult element
And that never happened. Crazy. Because Tucker said the same thing.
at the high levels of society, and specifically among the Jews. So many of the people that are perpetrating the lies and the destruction on the country, they are evildoers. They are people that worship false gods. They are people that practice magic or rituals or whatever. And more than anything, those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. Straight up. And I'm far more concerned about that than I am about even non-white people or mass migration. These people that are communing with demons and engaging in this sort of witchcraft and stuff, and these people that are suppressing the name Christ and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power. This is God's country. This is Jesus's country. This is not the domain of atheists or devil worshippers.
Okay, but also, I rebuke you, Nick Fuentes, because you talk like an absolute demon, a disgusting, deplorable human being, saying the N-word, cursing. I don't know if it's going to show it in this compilation, but saying that he F'd TPUSA, like he says it over and over and over again. It's really gross. And you claim to be a Christian man, and saying that women will actually want, it's disgusting. It's so disgusting. And then he idolizes the very pagans that he's talking about. It's very confusing. I don't really know if he quite understands his own inner worldview.
Perfidious Jews. This is Christ's country.
Josh Hammer and Mark Levin. Fuck these people. Like, deeply.
What a godly man we have here. Sorry, I'm getting snarky. It's just so...
All real Americans, if you are a real American, if you were born in this country, I don't even care who you are, what you are. If you are a real American that loves this country, you have generations in this country, your family or you fought for this flag, fought for the Constitution, fought for our church, fought for our civilization. For all of you, I say about Josh Hammer and Mark Levin and Laura Loomer, fuck them. Fuck them. Deeply, seriously, get them the fuck out of our country.
Nick Fuentes, it should be mentioned, despises Donald Trump and the MAGA movement as well.
Fuck you. Fuck you. You suck. You are fat. You are a joke. You are stupid. You are not funny. You are not as smart as you think you are. You are, and honestly, and if you watch my show, you know I've been very critical. I've never been this far. This just goes to show this entire thing has been a scam. When we look back on the history of populism in America, we are going to look back on the MAGA movement as the biggest scam in American history. And the liberals were right. The MAGA supporters were had. They were.
So that right there is just a brief glimpse into the twisted mind of Nick Fuentes. And there's plenty more where that came from, of course.
And there is. I encourage you to just go watch the rest of Ben Shapiro's video. I don't know if you have any takeaways, Isaac. I think for me, when I look at Nick Fuentes, I see a deeply insecure man who hates women, probably because no one would ever look at him. He doesn't really have a lot of like marketplace value when it comes to the dating pool. So he's very critical of it. Or maybe he just despises women because they don't want him. Or maybe he wishes he was attracted to women, because there's also a lot of evidence, and it's been kind of an open secret of rumor for years, that perhaps Nick Fuentes is gay. But you just see like a self-loathing individual who hates everybody who doesn't look or think like him. And he's just vile. Like, he's so off-putting and disgusting. And the fact that he's being platformed like mainstream when he said all of these things is mind blowing to me. And again, like Ben Shapiro said, he didn't ask a single question to confront any of these ideas that he has spewed on his platform for the better half of a decade. So I don't know if you have anything to add before we start into the actual interview, but it's so deplorable. It almost makes me feel ill. And I do want to add an old friend of mine, his roommate, was just like MAGA. And I've known him for years. And then since the rise of Tucker and Nick Fuentes has become just like Nick Fuentes and spews all the same things that Nick Fuentes says. And there's a big segment of the Gen Z right or Gen X right who actually are racist, who say the N word very, very casually, who joke about the Jews very openly, who joke about women wanting to be raped like that's acceptable and okay. Again, I think this is a rebellion to the cancel culture of the left. But this attitude, even if it doesn't leak into someone's politics, although I think that's why Nick Fuentes is attractive to a younger audience, are actually deeply racist and just deeply disgusting individuals. And those are who the young voters on the right are. And he was platformed on Tucker's podcast because he does have influence with those young men, which is scary. So I don't know if you have any thoughts before we
Yeah,
jump.
I'll preface this with Nick Fuentes is lucky that he is in a country and civilization, which actually, in its deep roots and values, he abhors. Hence why he loves Hitler, he loves Stalin. When's the last time we heard him talk reverentially or praiseworthy about the founding fathers or actual American heroes? You know, you could Abraham Lincoln. He probably thought it was bad to get rid of slavery. Clearly, by how he was talking, like what actual American conservative principle or idea? Because it's also long been a point of conservatism to call out accurately that the Democratic Party was the one in favor of slavery. They were the
Mhm.
party of Jim Crow. They were the party that voted majority against civil rights laws when a Republican president, Eisenhower, tried to pass them in the 1950s. It was only when the racist Democrat um, Lyndon Johnson decided that he was going to try to rearrange coalitions, even though he frequently used the N word, did not like black people, that he then decided to go and in the 60s pass civil rights laws. Then what happened? A majority of the votes that came for it were Republicans passing this policy that they had tried to get under their own administration. So the Democrat president that passed the civil rights law, more of his party opposed it. And he only opposed it for very, very pragmatic Machiavellian reasons. It's long been a point of accurate conservatism that racial hatred is not Christian. It was conservative Christians like William Wilberforce who pioneered the ending of slavery first in the British Empire, and then we imposed it across the globe. The origin of these civil rights is Christian ideology. It's the view that all men are created equal. There is not a shred of that in this little pipsqueak of a human. And I will say he's fortunate that he's in a society where we value things like free speech, free exchange of ideas. We don't call for executions of our enemies. All the things he calls against for Jews, people he doesn't like, because I will say, as a human and a man trying to aspire to be like Christ and who actually has a well formation and a hatred of bullies, he's fortunate that he's not subject to the physical response that any decent, actually Western civilization loving Christian man would want to do to him when he sees how this human speaks about women, about black people, about everybody he sees as weaker and lesser than him. It's
Mhm.
a bully in a body of someone who I could see sympathy for wanting to bully. That said,
Mhm.
that's my human reaction. We're supposed to be sanctified. I pray for that every day. So we oppose violence. We oppose, he had an attempt on his life at one point by some deranged person. We oppose that because we actually believe in these values. All the things that he hates, all the things that he would take away and make more like regimes where people are just disappeared and executed. He's very
Mhm.
fortunate that we have the actual spirit of Christ, which can sanctify those reactions, and that he lives in a society where he does not get things that in God's justice one could make a very good case for. I'll
Yeah.
preface that with my emotional reaction to these things. At an intellectual level, of course, it's entirely fatuous, absurd. Basically, all you have is edgelord, attempted troll, racist content from the edges of the internet. This is something that came about through a lot of young, disenfranchised, disaffected, loner, sad men. Uh,
Mhm.
and I
Incels.
think
Yeah.
yeah, incels. And I think one part that is accurately spoken to by some of the critics of this thing is
Mm.
it's tragic that people get to that state. It's sad that his soul has degraded to the point that it is. It's sad that through, all of the societal ills, some of which they talk about in this interview later, there have been these negative things. However, you're accountable. If a kid has a horrible life and he becomes a school shooter, it's sad that happened. He will still stand before the throne of God and face judgment for what he did. This man, through whatever horrible things has happened or come about or he's allowed into his life, has got to this state. Followers that admire him have come about that through a variety of factors, but they are still morally accountable. And you cannot take legitimate things or issues against people, hating on white men or other things like that, all of which I've experienced and I'm aware of, in society as a white man, and use it to legitimate evil. That's actually a very leftist thing to do, to say, I'm a victim of circumstances. I'm a victim. I'm weak. I'm controlled. I don't have moral accountability. I don't have authority. It's the same thing as people who accurately called out the killer of the young Ukrainian woman on that bus in North Carolina, to say, oh, because he was black or this or that happened, it's okay that he got off 27 times or something and did this execution. That's leftist. It's also leftist to say a kid who's lonely or has these issues or has bad things in society just got this way by accident. It's the most disempowering possible message. It's entirely anti-Christian and it's entirely anti-conservative.
And that's where people push back on the classification of the woke right. They're like, oh, it's an asinine topic. No, wokeism is this idea first that you're awakening to some sort of systemic oppression that is pushing you down. And the left will say, oh, it's people of color because of the patriarchy and white supremacy. The Nick Fuentes right says it was actually the Jews who are responsible for pornography, for all of the wars that have ever happened. That's what he said in the one clip. And they outsource their responsibility to another people group. So porn is bad, and someone like him is not responsible for watching porn. It's actually the Jews who created the porn. So it's the same kind of victim mentality of you're outsourcing responsibility to your oppressor power. And that's why I think the term woke right is very apt, even though people criticize it. It's this wokeism worldview and ideology, and it's the bedrock of grievance-based politics. And we're going to get to this now when we look at the interview. They talk about identity politics, but that is what they are leaning into. The identity that Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes claim to represent are your white Christian male. And we're going to see how that grievance-based worldview plays out throughout the whole interview. Okay. So we're just going to go section by section, and I'm going to skip through some of it because it's very, very long. But we're going to look at the origins of Nick Fuentes because I think it's quite interesting just to see, like you said, Isaac, like you're so misunderstood. What are your true origins? And I think this goes to prove that either someone orchestrated this, Tucker is being influenced by somebody, because they also had a spat like 2 or 3 weeks ago or a few months ago where they hated each other. So just this whole interview itself is quite odd.
Fuentes, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I wanted to meet you. I've heard about you.
I've heard about you.
So
They've heard about each other. They've talked mad crap about each other on the internet.
And already just look again, going back to our Tucker episode, look at how he started that, his demeanor, watch that throughout, and contrast it to the Cruz interview or anything else.
Yep. Here we go.
Well, thank you. I want to understand what you believe, and I want to give you a chance in a minute to just lay it out, not what you're pivoting against, which are a lot of the same thing. I agree with you on some of the things you're pivoting against for sure, but what do you affirmatively believe? So I just want to stand back and let you explain it. But first I want to understand how you got to where you are, how you became Nick Fuentes. So this is my understanding of your life arc. And tell me if I'm wrong. You show up at Boston University. You grew up in a suburb of Chicago, kind of working class, western suburb. And you show up at Boston University in the fall of 2016 at the height of the battle between Trump and Hillary. It's like this kind of pivot point in history. And you show up with a MAGA hat.
Okay. Also, I think this is important. I am the same exact age as Nick Fuentes. I was a freshman in 2016. I voted for Trump in every single election. I was a conservative in extremely liberal classrooms at Florida State University. And again, going back to like outsourcing or, victim blaming or saying like you were created into this, like, hey, here, you as well. I mean, you're not exactly the same age as me, Isaac, but we're able to critically think and navigate through different extreme political environments. And we don't have a villain origin story.
Somehow you didn't come out of it realizing that true conservatism is to love Hitler and Stalin.
No, isn't that so crazy? I know. So anyways, here we go. Just for reference and comparison, because I'm the exact same age as him.
And you have a Trump hat, and you have like basically off the shelf Republican views.
Yes.
And so describe the views that you had then, and then describe what happened.
As a side note, I feel bad for his advertisers who throughout this will get these horrific views on women or Jews, other things, and then, hey, buy our locally sourced meat. Like,
I know.
they didn't that. It
I
must
know.
like just probably good Christian farmer, with your
I know.
cat, and you're like, well, Hitler's really misunderstood. Please buy my beef.
Please, and the other weird thing too, and just going back to how everything is so curated, right? You have Tucker who's in this like log cabin with the American flag and like taxidermied like animals that supposedly he hunts and he fishes, and like the country intro is so crazy how he swung from an elite anchor on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and was the son to a very, very wealthy. Do you know his stepmom's family, Isaac, off the top of your head?
I
They're
forget.
heirs to some huge frozen food dynasty. And then his dad was a Reagan appointee, CIA operative, grew up in, the elite suburbs of like DC society. And now he's cosplaying as like this American, like good old American blue collar. It's just ridiculous. Okay, but here we go.
Yeah, it
Very
really
political.
gives
I
off
was reading.
overcompensation.
What were you saying, Isaac?
Saying it really gives off like trying to overcompensate.
Yeah, and it's like it's so performative. And again, like people like in the Republican Party or who are MAGA look to these people like, oh, he's just one of us. He's new media. He's not influenced by corporate media outlets or the establishment media. But new media is just the old establishment media. The special interests that funded old media fund new media, i.e. Tucker Carlson. And also Candace is married into an extremely wealthy British family. Like all these people transmitting these grievance-based politics or this anti-Jewish worldview that's becoming more populist are elites, and that follows a trend seen throughout all of history. So Tucker is not the exception. Anyways, finally, we'll get into the interview.
A lot of the libertarian stuff, Austrian school, Chicago school, economic type literature, because that's what was popular at the time. If you went online in the early 2010s, that's all the conservative content there really was. That was the most extremely online type
Libertarian
stuff.
economics.
Well, yeah, basically kind of the remnant of the Ron Paul revolution.
Yes.
The Young Americans for Liberty, PragerU, which kind of skews a little more, I guess, conservative, but very basic small government, individualism, libertarian type stuff.
So you watch PragerU videos?
Oh, yeah. I was in the Prager Force.
What's that?
It's a Facebook group for college kids, and they promote the PragerU videos.
Wow.
To the college students and high school
So you really were
students.
a product of the moment.
Absolutely.
And how'd you feel about Trump?
Well, initially, I didn't like Trump. When the primary started in 2015, I considered him to be a statist.
Yeah.
Which sounds so ridiculous now.
No, a lot of people thought that.
Yeah. And I was a libertarian, so I saw him as a big government, 1990s liberal. When he was asked about healthcare, he said, well, we'll take care of everybody. And I said, I'm a Rand Paul guy, Ted Cruz guy. Those were kind of my people back in 2015.
You like Ted Cruz?
I was a cruise missile.
Does Cruz know that?
I don't think so, no. I was actually on his campaign.
You were on the Ted Cruz campaign?
I don't know if I was on the campaign, but I door knocked in a little village in Chicago, in McKinley Park, for Ted Cruz.
No way.
In the Illinois primary.
Did he write you a thank you note?
No, I didn't get a thank you. He lost, so I guess.
Yeah, he did. He did in a very humiliating way. So wow, that's amazing. So what happened?
Okay, we have to get through a lot of this, but it actually, and I'm not just saying this to be hyperbolic or to say something inflammatory. He reminds me a lot of like the Hitler archetype, right? Like didn't get thanked for his role in World War I. Like, no, I don't know if they even knew about me. Has like this little man syndrome. I used to door knock as well. No, you don't get thanked for it. And then I get Tucker's like slight, like just can't.
He's
pass
already
above
trying to build up, justifying the grievance, like the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. A presidential candidate didn't write you a note. Also, again, it shows to Tucker's cattiness, and this is what's so ironic of like these people who are trying to contend for masculinity, maybe in a biblical or Christian model, like stable families, like, Tucker trying to cosplay as a man of the people from the country, whatever, like this. Two of the most like insecure, catty, sensitive, not masculine, worst exemplars of Christian virtue and how they speak, how they conduct themselves, talking about how everybody else around them are like bad Christians, they're heretics, and they're not really MAGA. It's just, it's tragic when you think about it.
It is. All right, I'm gonna not pause it so we can get through it, but there's just so much to hate. It's hard to sit through and watch it all.
So I, like everybody else in 2016, went through this ideological awakening. And first I shifted to Trump. And the first realization that I had is it started in 2016, actually, because the primaries, started in 15, around April or May, I think, was the first announcements. And I had very negative feelings about Trump. And like I said, pro Rand Paul, pro Cruz. But when the actual Iowa caucus happened and the primaries began, I saw that Trump was dominating. And every night in the Super Tuesday, when they had all the big contests, one after the other, I remember the media was furious that he was winning one after the other. And I remember thinking to myself, like, structurally, if I'm a libertarian or a conservative and we want to change the country, we have to win elections. If you want to win elections, you have to bypass the media. I sort of had this realization that the media was really standing in the way. They were the problem. And I had this realization that all the conservatives and Republicans up to that point were afraid to take on the media. They, like Mitt Romney, would cower before them and were so apologetic and so weak. And so initially I said, I actually don't ideologically agree with Trump at all, but he will destroy the liberal media, or at least their monopoly on thought and opinion.
Yes.
And then a breakthrough can occur. So that was kind of the first hump. And I said, I could get behind Trump because he's a winner. He'll win for our side. And that was kind of the first big thing. And then as I listened to him more and more, his speeches and his rhetoric, I started to think about immigration.
Which you hadn't really considered before?
Never. And the reason why is because I was from a 95% white suburb. So the diversity had not really reached my corner of Chicago yet. Me and my family, not so much my family, they grew up in the city, but growing up in the suburbs, I was insulated from that. So it was just not even, it's actually, you're going to love this. I don't know if I've ever even said this on an interview before. I was listening to Mark Levin's show. This goes to show how normie I was.
Actually?
I listened to him every day.
You listen to Mark Levin every day?
In high school, yes.
Wow.
I was a fan. I loved his show. And I actually liked how he was kind of obnoxious and mean to his callers.
Yeah.
Vicious. And I liked that. I thought that was funny. But I'll never forget one show. He goes live and he says, America's becoming a majority non-white country. Does anybody think that's a good idea? And I was thinking to myself, yeah, that actually doesn't sound so good. I didn't really even think that America's becoming majority minority like that.
And so you were radicalized on race by Mark Levin?
Yes.
Are you making that up?
That's a real story.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. He planted the seed at least. And then I saw a graphic on 4chan or Twitter, and I'm sure you've seen something similar. It said, this is what the map looks like, the electoral map. If only men vote, if only women vote, if only whites vote, if only non-whites vote. And it became very obvious what the electoral problem is. It's demographics. These immigrants are coming here. They're going to turn Texas blue like they turned California blue.
Yeah, I saw it happen.
Yeah, and you look at even the opinion polls. These people don't believe in free speech. They don't believe in the Constitution, the Second Amendment. As a libertarian, the things that are, and as American, things that are important to you, they don't understand these things. And so I said, that's another political obstacle. You've got the media, you've got immigration. So I'm thinking like, well, we're going to vote for Ted Cruz. He's going to be the constitutionalist. We'll vote for Rand Paul. He'll be the libertarian. But what stands in the way of political power for us? It's the media and it's immigration. So I said, well, we got to get Trump to beat the media, build the wall, deport the illegals. And once we set the country straight, then we can actually have our constitutional republic back. That was kind of the idea. And that's the mindset that I had going into college.
Amazing. So then what happened?
So I go to college and I'm just, at that point, a huge Trump supporter. And you got to understand, for me, for my generation, so I was 18. I turned 18 in August 2016. And to us,
That's
Trump...
amazing.
Yeah, well, because we're like the first generation that was influenced by Trump coming of age in that moment.
No, I say it's amazing because when you're living in something, you don't appreciate its full significance. But to be 18 in August of 2016, so this really is, as you're forming your views and really yourself.
Yes.
In the middle of this. We'll admit that we are not the most disciplined snackers. When the pantry calls,
walking down the street, and it's a city campus. So you're walking down Commonwealth Avenue and you're in the city of Boston, which is super liberal. And at that time, it's different than it was now. People were getting fired for wearing MAGA hats. People were getting punched in the face. It was like being a Trump supporter it was out there actually back then. It was controversial. It was controversial everywhere, not even, just in liberal Boston. But so I was wearing my hat everywhere and I was just getting accosted constantly. In the dining hall, people come up and yell in my face. Some black girl in a hijab ran up to me and said, you know what you're supporting? You're racist. This. And I'm trying to get my pizza. I'm trying to get my oatmeal or whatever at the dining hall. This was happening constantly. And so I was going then on Twitter, and I had a small Twitter account with my real name and face, and I had, maybe 200 followers, and I'm posting about my experiences. And I caught the attention of a lot of people on campus for wearing the hat, for posting on Twitter, and they found my Twitter.
You've only been there like a month?
Last weeks.
Okay, so I find his story to be quite boring and not unique at all. So we can skip ahead, but I do want to point out that I think Nick Fuentes represents a lot of the young men who he has a large audience with, which is, oh, we were bullied for wearing a red MAGA hat. And I'm sure you were too, Isaac. I was as well. I had a lot of people hate me. I had a lot of people unfollow me. And I do think that there is kind of a collective memory on the MAGA right, which does remember cancel culture, which is why maybe they're a little hesitant to call out someone like Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson, or who is still sore about the left calling anyone who wore a MAGA hat a Nazi. And yes, all of that is frustrating. I think that radicalism is why Trump won so largely last year in the 2024 election. But unfortunately, people like him, and do you notice his language? Like, he says, "I was radicalized." So it's almost
Yep.
like he acknowledges that he has this, like, villain origin story. He was radicalized. And I think that is the current where a lot of MAGA people get swept up, is because they can sympathize with what his experience was, or during COVID, not getting the vaccine. Um, and so all of those things can be true. That doesn't mean then that that should be a gateway into radical thought like Nick Fuentes. Like, there should be some acknowledgement of, yeah, like, the left is radical. The left kind of created um this narrative that if you were MAGA, you were a Nazi. But then that doesn't mean that we shouldn't call out Nick Fuentes, who is an actual Nazi. So I don't know, because you kind of came of age around the same time as me, but I think this is where a lot of your average MAGA voters are getting caught up, because they might sympathize with his origin story or his 2016 Trump story.
Yeah, so I was I'm a few years older, and so I was already working in DC and in the conservative movement. All those bona fides. I remember the debates actively on the Hill, think tanks, all these things about what does Trump represent, all of these different things. I think part of this should be a parable for the left too, if they're capable of realizing it. Of it's the boy who cried wolf. You said everybody who was
Yeah.
MAGA or okay with Trump, even begrudgingly, was a Nazi. And now you have people who are actual Nazis trying to take over this movement.
Mhm.
Um, and it's tragic because the word has so lost its meaning. And just as you depicted, yes, it comes to a point where you're going to have a fraction of people, but it's so tragic that this is the case. But if you have a fraction of people who are mislabeling you as racist or a Nazi, and you get annoyed with it, you don't like cancel culture, the actual first woke left stuff, you will have a portion of people that'll be like, "F it," maybe I am. I'll go do and see that. But again, it's so in a lot. It's tragic, but it also shows like a weak intellect, a
Mhm.
weak moral character, because you're going off and becoming that way in a similar way of like guys who try to hit on girls and maybe isn't perceived as attractive and thinks they're all mean and rude, and they'll say he's creepy, and then he goes on to become like a serial killer and kills
Yeah.
women. Like, it's sad you were mistreated, but that does not justify your later arc. And you are showing your total lack of moral fiber, how you're just a sail in the wind of whatever circumstances happen to you. There's nothing ideological. There was no ideas or root. You just became what you were accused of being. Um, that's the first point. And in a similar way, too, on the other extreme, I remember people that were having the debate, is Trump conservative? Can we trust him? All of these things. And a portion of them became never Trumpers. And
Mhm.
they abandoned every conservative view that they had. Bill Kristol is an example. And now they're left wing on all the issues. They just vote for Democrats, all that. That also shows they had no moral fiber. They had no ideology. And these people, including Carlson, will mock them and say, how shallow, how stupid. Yes, that's true. And you're doing it just in the opposite way. If you have a set of ideas, if you have principles, if you know you're not full of hate, you claim to be a Christian, you're not racist, you're not Nazi, you will continue on with what you're actually doing. The response is to not become an actual Nazi. And that's
Yeah.
again why so many conservatives that I think are responding wrong to this online are
Mhm.
saying, oh, you guys are just jumping on the train and like saying everyone's a Nazi. Tucker, all this is like, no, if you interview an actual Nazi and you excuse him, you give zero pushback, you defend him, all of these things, at the very least, you're not very turned off by Nazism or his ideas or his thoughts. That's legitimate because he calls himself a Nazi. And it's like you're taking crazy pills when you look at this, like, oh, you guys are sounding like the left to call people Nazis. If somebody praises Hitler, calls himself a Nazi, says all of these things,
Then they are not.
we're just listening to him. It's similar with the jihadists, like
Yeah.
Hamas, all these things. They tell you what they believe, and you can't stomach that, or you're too ideologically driven to process it.
Mhm.
The lesson to all of this is like actually think about ideas, think about logic. Are you in good faith and come to these things? Don't live your life entirely reactively to how you're treated or what you're called. Actually find your own consistent core.
Yeah. And I think it demonstrates a lack of nuance on both sides of the political aisle, which is, I think, why these radical ideas become more populist, because they do appeal to the emotional heartstring, a bad experience. Like, if you think of the woke left, it's, well, if you're a person of color, you've probably experienced some sort of racism, or someone's looked at you weird on the street, and therefore you're oppressed by systemic racism. And the same thing on this new woke right. It's, well, if you were ever called a Nazi, then, like, you're oppressed, and it's, you almost like become, like you said, what you're accused of. And it shows a lack of nuance, and those are universal experiences that might have happened. And then I think that's where the gateway to radicalization happens. And so I'm sure a lot of our viewers can maybe sympathize with Nick Fuentes of, yeah, you were made fun of for wearing a MAGA hat, or maybe you were canceled and then COVID happened and maybe you didn't get the vaccine because you didn't think it was ethical. Um, but again, that shouldn't be your villain origin story. There should be a capacity for nuance and being able to not throw out the entire GOP like the baby out with the bathwater. You should be able to critique certain things or respond and articulate your points to the left without becoming what the left accuses you of.
Yeah, there's something so insidious about this too, because it's leftist, it's postmodern, because
Yeah.
they are stripping words of their meaning.
Yeah.
Confucius famously said, when words lose their meaning, people lose their lives. And this is something that the left did intentionally, from Rousseau on the postmodern schools of philosophy, to say language is just a power game to get what you want. That is how the woke right is acting in
Yeah.
this way. Words have meaning. So to take another analogy, for a long time, conservatives have called out George Soros for his awful left-wing policies, propping up all these DAs that let criminals out on the street to murder. That's bad. He happens to be Jewish. And then the left, for years, said, if you call out George Soros, it's because you're anti-Semitic. It's false. It's fatuous. And nobody's ever said he does these things because he is. However, for a conservative to hear that and get labeled anti-Semitic and then get annoyed and say, you know what? I am anti-Semitic now. I just hate all the Jews. Ignore all the Jews that actually are conservative funders, that are pro-life, that have done all these great things. I'm just going to hate all of them. You are letting the enemy occupy your mind, tell you what you believe, and react from hate with that. It's the weakest possible response you could have, the least masculine and the least Christian.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So we're just going to skip forward a little bit because he talks about the Daily Wire trying to cancel him. TP USA Charlie Kirk also did not give a platform to Nick Fuentes because he viewed him as ideologically dangerous. So we're going to kind of skip forward to why he decided to challenge the establishment.
So where does that leave you ideologically? Like, how are you changing at this point?
So at this point, I'm realizing that something is deeply wrong here in the conservative movement, because we were led to believe in those days of the campus culture wars and Gamergate and all that, is that we're the marketplace of ideas and we're about free speech and the rest of it. And here I am being like nuked from orbit by Ben Shapiro as a kid. And for asking what
You're being challenged on your bad ideas. Those are different things. Again, we've talked about this kind of ad nauseum at this point, but it's just so disingenuous. And the fact Tucker goes, oh yeah, you're right. So again, if you're questioning where Tucker's allegiance is,
I thought were reasonable questions, because I didn't come from some strange background. I come from a normal home. You know, my parents are Catholic. They're married. We came from a relatively affluent suburb. I went to Lyons Township. That's like a very affluent high school. In other words, I didn't wake up as like the son of, William Luther Pierce. I wasn't like a skinhead or something. You know, I was like a normal guy that was like, yeah, like country's too diverse. We're too pro-Israel. Like, this is reasonable. And I was just getting sandbagged for it and blacklisted. And what's more, nobody cared. Like, because I remember going on Twitter and saying, like, why isn't anyone sticking up for me? Where's Dave Rubin? The free speech warrior. Where's he on this one? Where's Shapiro? Where's all these people? And in some way, they were all sort of complicit in this. So I realized that the conservative movement was completely bankrupt in that way.
Yeah,
I became very radical.
Well, you became.
and he says, I became very radical. He's saying it out loud, which is so crazy. And also, Ben Shapiro did advocate for him to be reinstated on X, or then Twitter. So that's disingenuous as well. Just because you didn't get an endorsement on your horrific ideas doesn't mean that you were canceled or that people in the movement didn't stand up for you. Again, there's like this really fragile, like, shame wound that Nick Fuentes has. Like, no one stood up for me. And I actually think he like believes that. And then he goes, and then I became radical. He's again saying the quiet part a lot. And I think, let's see what Tucker has to say. I think he's going to try and temper this radicalization and say it's not that radical.
I mean, let me just say, I'm so familiar with, I was much older when it happened to me and much more insulated. I was not a college student. I was like 45. So, and I was in a much better place to withstand the pressure. But I do think this is my main question to you, is when you get attacked, when people call you names, like they always call me racist. And I would always think to myself, I'm actually not. I would tell you if I was racist. I'm a little sexist, but I'm not racist. And I never understood why they did that. And then I thought, maybe the point is to make me racist. Where you just get to a point where you're like, well, if you're going to slander me, then I'll just become the thing you're calling me. I do think that's a feature of human nature, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you stare too intently at the accusers, at the, whatever Ben Shapiro's or Mark Levin's or Ted Cruz or whoever it is calling you names, it like distorts you and you actually change and become what they say you are. Have you thought that ever? Are you worried that happened to you?
No, I don't think it ever did, because I know who I am. I had a very firm grounding of what I'm about, which is that
I was deeply Catholic, and I still am, deeply patriotic and pro-American. And I don't consider myself temperamentally to be an angry or a hateful person. So I never, in other words, lost my center. You know, they say this thing about you look into the abyss and the abyss stares back into you. That never really happened to me. I was frustrated. I was frustrated because I felt like I was being denied a level playing field, opportunity, and it wasn't fair. I felt like I was right. And these people that were basically hypocrites, grifters, not really conservative, they were controlling the conversation. And as a consequence, they were controlling the Republican movement. And I really perceive this as like an urgent crisis. Because if we wanted Trump to deliver America first, to realize it, the Trump movement had to transform the conservative movement to reflect the victory that Trump won.
So, and I won't keep torturing you with biographical questions, but I do want to, like, so how your show gets canceled, you drop out of college, you have no money, you decide you want to work at the Leadership Institute, which is like a conservative think tank or some organization of longstanding in Arlington, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Can't get the job there because you're worried about immigration. It's all pretty amazing. And then, like, where does that leave you? How did you succeed?
Well,
did you do it?
I started a YouTube channel,
yeah.
And I was in my parents' basement, and I put up a green screen, I got my computer, webcam, and I just started going live every night in the same way that I did at RSBN. I just did it on my own channel where I had creative control over it. And at that point, I basically mounted an attack on the conservative establishment from the outside. I sort of realized that there's sort of two ways you could play this. You could infiltrate the conservative movement. I could recant all my views and apologize and pretend to be one of them and bypass the gatekeepers, the censors. I said, or I could kind of be in the wilderness and I would be alone and I would be radioactive, but I could challenge the credibility and legitimacy of the conservative movement and its claim to represent conservatives. And that was kind of the mission, was to say, no, the immovable standard is America first. I'm going to represent it. And the conservative movement is going to have to move to me. I will not move towards them. And I thought maybe I'll make money and maybe I won't, but I'm going to try.
And that's the Overton window we're talking about, right? So he's literally saying, I'm going to let my radical views, they're going to move to me. And we're now in a window where that's happening. I also think it's interesting, kind of like what you were saying, Isaac, that even Tucker's like, well, they call you a racist and then you become a racist. And it's totally sidestepping accountability. But I think that there is almost a bit of a truth to that.
Yeah, and I think there's one element where it's showing, again, Tucker is not stupid. He's not ignorant here. Like, to his credit, that was actually one of the more self-aware things he's saying, even though he's actually undergoing that himself. But trying to basically say, I hear this, but like that didn't mean you have to like be a Nazi. Yeah. And it's funny because Fuentes lacks that self-awareness, even though I think he's more evil at root. But he said before, as you said, I was radicalized, meaning you moved. You were not here at the outset. But then he is asked that question, did you basically become what they said you were? And then he says, no, I didn't. I have this core. So he lacks that. You know, he's a, I don't know, maybe less intelligent, less grounded, less self-aware. So that's an indictment of him, but also an indictment of Tucker too, because it shows he gets this trend, he gets what's happening. He must know those views that he doesn't choose to ask him about at all.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too. He like calls established GOP or MAGA leaders grifters. And I'm like, so you're actually just projecting like what you are.
Yeah. And when did they become grifters? Like all these people he said he liked, they became grifters when they started to see him actually being anti-Semitic and all this. And again, you know, we know some of these people, we could go talk to it. I do not accept his case that he just asked very simple propositional questions like, please explain to me the justification for our alliance with Israel. And then he was called an anti-Semite. Like, Cassie knew him, these other people. There was certainly more than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, then too, just to add one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Even if you take his version of it, the worst defense he's got is not to get jobs. Like, you go into an existing movement and then you're going off in a different way and people choose not to hire or support your direction of it. And he says later, I want to change it. I want to alter it. Okay, then you have to do what he eventually later did, make your own thing and try to co-opt it. But to act as if like, you know, you're a member of Congress, you're in a think tank, you have this long set of ideas for decades and hundreds of years, and then a new kid comes in trying to add racist elements or anti-Semitic stuff, and you're offended and you're canceled and harmed for not getting a job. Again, you're not put in prison. Like it's a very entitled view.
And I think it's also interesting he says that they're not true conservatives, but what he espouses isn't true conservatism. And then in this, they say that they're actually not conservatives at some point in this
and I'll see
interview.
how it goes.
So again, it's also ideologically contradictory.
Yes.
Do you think that was a good choice?
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than like, but why not like Antifa or, you know, I don't know, Anti-Defamation League, or there are a lot of institutions on like George Soros. Like, why would it be the conservative establishment? Why do you think that was important?
Well, I kind of took a page from Trump's playbook, which is that you have to, in the country, the left was hegemonic over all the institutions. And you have this organized opposition to the left and the Democrats and all the left wing controlled institutions. And the organized opposition comes from movement conservatism, the Republican Party, Fox News, the sort of constellation of conservative institutions. And I said, the problem is, whether you go Democrat or you go Republican, you're kind of just like getting the same thing. You're getting the establishment effectively. The opposition is basically controlled or moderated. It's not authentic opposition. It's not a true alternative. And so I said, we, and by we, I mean the true America First nationalists, we need to fight for the mantle of the opposition. And then leading the opposition, then we can take the fight to the left as the conservatives, as the Republicans, whatever. But first, you have to win that internal battle among the audience that the conservatives have. Because that's really the problem, is that they have usurped. The base is extremely conservative, extremely anti-left. But the Republican Party, like those that represent them, are not at all. A lot of them are atheists, a lot of them are gay,
I don't think that's true anymore. I think the way he's describing the GOP would have been the GOP pre-MAGA, but especially not the current administration. So I don't think that is representative at all. But again, when he's talking about they're atheist, a lot of them are gay. Ironic, because I think there's so much going on here. It's like a lot of self-hatred, because then also like he loves Stalin, and Stalin is an atheist. So it's like he looks to all these people in the past that he loves, or Hitler, atheist, gay, questionably himself, feminist, he hates women. So it's just like, I don't know. You go ahead, Isaac. It's like so frustrating to me that there's so much self-hatred and it's so contradictory.
It is. And neither of us are clinical psychologists, but I imagine one could have a field day with what's happening in here. But even just at our surface level, it's a case of the lady doth protest too much. Famously, when someone's just feel like, oh yeah, I'm definitely not this thing, like this thing that nobody asked about, I'm definitely not that. The amount of times he brings up the gay thing. For those who haven't seen, again, this is why we gave a content warning. There's video of Fuentes being on a live stream and then accidentally showing one of his browser windows, streaming gay porn. That, along with many other things he's said, done, ways he's talked about things, the fact that he's single to this long amount. He also has this extremely weird rant about how it's very, very gay to have heterosexual sex with a woman. Like, it's so gay. And it's weird because you see these things at war in his head because he's so deeply misogynistic and burned by women. He thinks it's like weak and feminine and the thing that he hates. Therefore, to have any interaction or consent or like relationship with that must be weak. And he thinks of that as gay. But then he also, I think, probably has those tendencies. At the very least, whatever, he had that stream come up. Carlson actually literally asks a little bit about this in an interesting way. Deep self-loathing and hatred. Again, too, it's the only trend is things that are anti-American, anti-conservative, because that's why he praises atheistic Stalin, communism, and that clip where he referenced Shapiro played before, where it says, Hitler was maybe a little gay and like maybe into pedophilia. A very good book I recommend. It's called The Pink Swastika. And then also another one called Hitler's Table Talks by Hugh Trevor Roper. These conclusively show Hitler was neo-pagan, loved Norse mythology, hated Christianity. He thought it was weak and pathetic that a god would die, very unmasculine in his view. There was massive amounts of homosexuality in his inner circle, particularly in the SS. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But again, when you go totally pagan or atheistic or anti-Christian or communist or Hitlerian Nazi, like, you're going to go off on all of these different ways. And these are the figures that he's praising and obsessed with. And yet he's the one who's really going to come into the conservative movement that he feels burned by and take it on the true direction.
Yeah. And it's just like the Nazis first exterminating gays, but then also engaging in gay sex acts. It's like this internalized
self-loathing.
Right. There's a lot of self-loathing happening here. It's very sadistic, contradictory. And I think I might have skipped the Stalin video, but I'll pull it up in a second. Just
and so I said, like, we kind of need to rally, like Trump did, rally the base against the establishment, and then take the fight to the left as the true alternative. And if you can win that, then you win the country. That was kind of Trump's model.
What did you see as like the most important gatekeepers that needed to be overturned, pushed aside in order to do this?
It was the Zionist Jews, like Dave Rubin, like Ben Shapiro, like Dennis Prager. It was these the guys that were really controlling the media apparatus that seemed to me to be the biggest impediment.
Fox is not a Jewish business, though.
Well, Rupert Murdoch is an ally of Netanyahu, so he's aligned.
Yeah.
And he owns the whole News Corp empire. So, and yeah, he's certainly a part of it also.
I mean, Dave Rubin, though, does he matter?
No, not really.
Right. I mean, Dave Rubin is like, I don't know, do people watch Dave Rubin?
They did back then. I mean, because you got to consider they were kind of like the ascendant new media, They represented the next big thing.
I mean, and Ben Shapiro seems irrelevant to me now.
Now, but back then, for
No,
the
I guess
young, he was
that's true.
huge. Mhm.
So maybe you won.
Oh, certainly.
But wasn't that long ago that many Americans thought they were inherently safe from the kinds
Oh, Isaac.
Again, just to pick up on this thing of like, it is, people should just go rewatch the movie Mean Girls. Like,
Yes.
even when he talks about Ruben, you get a sense they're at this table, like, gossiping. Stacy, nobody talks to Stacy anymore. Like, her parties were so last summer.
Yep.
And then Fuentes is like, well, yeah, but people used to go to Stacy's parties. Like, back in the 2010s, Ruben had more influence, according to Fuentes' story. Like, every bit of it, it's not even just ideological. It's nasty. It's catty.
So
It's
yeah.
pathetic.
It's so pathetic. Or even Ben Shapiro, is he relevant anymore? They each have millions. I think Ben has over 7 million subscribers. Dave Rubin has like 3 million, and they still they have a voice in the movement. And yeah, it's just like, it's so Mean Girl. It's like, and you won, right? Like, you won. No, I don't think you won, Nick Fuentes. Okay. So let's go into what they have to say about identity politics. I also hate how his ads just like pop up in the middle of.
Yeah. I'll say one last thing on that. We may get to it, but basically this line of questioning Tucker's doing, again, trying to give him the best possible thing. He's trying to pull him slightly away from the essentialist racial hatred of Jews, and
Right.
basically like, oh, but there's this other group you can hate, like the Christian Zionists, which he says later I despise more than anyone. We can get into that. But he's trying to say Murdoch's not Jewish. Like, he's basically saying, expand your realm of hate to mine. I hate the people that like the Jews. I especially hate the Christians that like the Jews. It's a weird version of like, don't fixate so much on the blood stuff, because we can also hate the people that like those people.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's like, let's extend the base of people that we're hating against. Yeah, no, 100%. And now they're going to get into identity politics, which of course they blame the Jews on. But ironically, going back to this like wokeism worldview we've talked about, they are creating a grievance-based identity politics, which is white, Christian, specifically male, against the Zionists, against the
But I
Christian
also think there's
Zionists,
like a
against the
true, not just principle,
establishment,
but like
against
spiritual
the left.
reality that we have to defend, which is God created every person as an individual, not as a group. No one gave birth to a community. Like, we hate that kind of thinking,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Collectivist thinking like that. That's identity politics. That's what Dave Rubin engaged.
But they engage in identity politics, groupthink, the white Christian male. That is the entire premise of how they talk. And then this is where people don't read between the lines of what Tucker says. Tucker is saying God doesn't create people groups, which is also not true. God is a creator of all the world, language, ethnicity, diversity. But what he's getting at is that God didn't create the chosen people, the Jews. That's kind of the subtext of what he's saying here.
Like, you don't
He
pay any
created
attention to Dave 'cause he's, like,
individuals.
shallow. But we're not going to be that, right? Or no?
No, I completely agree with you. And
We're not going to be that, as they're being the most
Like,
shallow,
telling
like
that, like, Stacey,
gossiping.
we're way cooler than her.
Oh my
That's-
God.
not to be that guy and
It's
say
just,
that
it's
thing,
so
but like,
insane.
my best friend is
All
a
right, here we
Jewish
go. We're going to talk about the
person.
Jews
No,
again.
But here's my substantive disagreement, because as a Catholic, I could not agree more with you
Yes.
in what you're saying. I love all people, even the ones that don't like us. We have to love them all, and we have to recognize that
We're required to.
yes, and especially Aquinas says the Jews are a witness people, and so they actually have special protections under the law, according to Catholic philosophy. But I guess my substantive disagreement, which I've said on the show also, is the idea that neoconservatism in Israel has nothing to do with Jewishness, Jewish identity, the Jewish religion, because clearly the state of Israel and the neocons are deeply motivated by that ethnic identity, and their allegiance to Israel proceeds from that. The plan of greater Israel, the blood.
There's no such thing as greater Israel. This is a myth that the new woke right has created. We as Christians are not motivated because of the ethnic identity of the Jews. There's twofold. There's the Christian connection, that they are our spiritual forefathers, but that's not even where my stance politically on Israel comes from. Politically, it's because Israel is the only democracy in the region. We get an immense amount of intel. It is overall a strategic benefit to U.S. grand strategy for us to be allies with Israel in the region. And also, as a Christian, having a democracy instead of an Islamist caliphate governing over important Christian sites like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in my vested interest as an American who wants to go visit my spiritual ancestral homeland. So there are a lot of reasons why I care. I care about women's rights. I don't agree with Sharia law. I care about the right of religious pluralism, which would not exist in Israel if it wasn't a democracy and it was, again, an Islamist caliphate. So there is a lot of reasons why. It has nothing to do with the ethnic identity of the Jews. And I find it really interesting that they kind of boil it down to like the blood ethnicity of Jews, because that's also very fascist to look at the Jews and like the ethnic part of it. It's quite interesting. I think that ties into their anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalism perspective as well.
Yeah, and just to add on that, we've talked elsewhere, and there are good resources on this ridiculous conspiracy theory of the Greater Israel. A bunch of it goes back to this memo that Dave Smith is obsessed with of uh, Wesley Clark when he was I think he was a general already at that point, but kind of lower level in the Department of Defense at a time during the Bush administration, claims to have seen this one memo that listed a bunch of countries that were kind of like bad actors that we don't like and maybe want to do something about. And this thing that nobody else has said or talked about, or there's any demonstration Donald Rumsfeld even saw or like put forward, that basis of this guy, Wesley Clark, who ran against Bush in the election and had every political incentive to vilify or attack. That whole theory goes back to this idea. It's false for many reasons. I also recommend the debate that Coleman Hughes did with Dave Smith because he goes into this refuting it more. But one very simple example, the Iraq War that everyone loves to obsess on, Israel did not gain from and they did not want the Iraq War. Why is this? Iraq had fired Scud missiles at Israel. We made them pull back and not respond. They had been an actor, closer than Iran even to Israel. They're a bad actor here. However, in comparison, they were also enemies with Iran, it's a much larger country. It's wealthier, better educated, has way more influence, and was a bigger threat. I believe he was in the 70s or 80s, I forget, but Iran and Iraq went to war. And from Israel's perspective, like it's two enemies fighting each other. So they saw and they asked Bush, and, to the extent any ally tells someone an issue, like if we were going to invade Ireland, the UK would have an opinion on it, not because they control us, but because they're like, hey, that's on our border. We're allies with you. Can we advise you or tell you how this affects us? There's nothing nefarious about that. There's nothing, puppet mastery. But actually, this is a case where they did not want us to do this. Ariel Sharon asked Bush not to do this because they knew strategically Iraq is bad, but it was not Islamist. It was a corrupt Ba'athist, which is actually an offshoot of a Nazi Arab party. It was more secular tyranny versus the radical Islamist tyranny in Iran, which was more of a threat. So they realized if you knock down this power next to us, they both hate us, but they also hate each other. That's going to strategically empower Iran, which is exactly what happened. That was not a part of the Jews' master plan. It didn't help Israel. At the time, there were journalists that were on the ground, like in the lead up to the Iraq war, talking about this. The journalist from Commentary Magazine was referencing this the other day. We know opinion polls. The Israeli people understood this was not going to be good for them in the long run. You topple Saddam, the war is massively mishandled, so it didn't have to end this way. But as a result of Obama pulling out, mishandling, Iran is empowered. They send in these militias who then kill hundreds of American troops, which actually Israel helped avenge because they ended up killing several of the members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that were responsible for killing those troops. So we get in this war. Israel does not want us to go into Iraq. We go in anyway. Iran is empowered. They kill Americans. And eventually they avenged this thing that they didn't want, they didn't gain from. This whole theory of this massive control, what they wanted, like this is public record, what they actually called for. The entire theory
Well, this is
completely evaporates
just BLM,
with a
the new version.
basic
This
level
is
of
identity
analysis.
politics. They're engaging in identity politics. I mean, that's just so obvious to me. But the problem in your response, I get what you're saying, but the problem in your response is it does not apply to every individual.
No, and I would never say that.
Okay. Well, I just think it's important to say that, not to kind of like dodge the accusations against you. My best friends are Jewish. Like, okay, I agree. Embarrassing, even though it's probably true. And it's true in my case, actually. But whatever. But because just that principle that we're all judged as individuals by what we do, that our faith, the decisions that we make, the way we live our lives, and God will judge every one of us in that way. And that's how we're supposed to judge. Like, I think that's true.
Yeah, and I totally agree. But I guess the disagreement is, you say identity politics like it's a bad thing. I think identity is reality.
Identity is reality. Absolutely.
So what Tucker's saying is he doesn't like identity politics when it comes to the Jews. And Nick Fuentes is saying, actually, no, like I totally agree with identity politics. He just thinks that white Christian male identity politics is superior to that of the Jews. And again, like what you're saying, Isaac, he's wanting to zoom out and say, no, you just judge individuals, which includes, he's going to go on to say, the Christian Zionists as well. So he's trying to expand his pool of the other, who's an enemy to
Rwanda,
true conservatism or whatever
the most force just
they claim to be.
You can't have that here, right?
Yeah, but I would say specifically as it pertains to, you, I think, have said it's the neocons, and I think that neoconservatism, where does it arise from? It arises from Jewish leftists who were mugged by reality when they saw the surprise attack in the Yom Kippur War.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of it for sure. But then, like, how do you explain Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, and there are a lot like that, John Bolton? I mean, I've known them all, George W. Bush, like Karl Rove. I mean, all people I know personally who I've seen like be seized by this brain virus, and they're not Jewish. Most of them are self-described Christians, and then the Christian Zionists who are, well, Christian Zionists. Like, what is that?
Right.
And I can just say for myself, I dislike them more than anybody. Because like what? Because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian. That's why. So I don't like. Why not? Like, I'm pissed at the neocons. Very pissed. I've said that a million times. I've been mad since December of 2003 when I went to Iraq. And so like I went and asked straightforward questions to Ted Cruz because that seemed like.
All right, we just debunked the whole Iraq thing, but
Well,
to circle back to, he hates Christian Zionists the most because it's a heresy. First off, that's not true. And to claim that Christians who support Israel are heretics is a very, very theologically charged rebuke to make that has zero footing. Mark Driscoll actually did a really great response to this. And he talked about how, there's closed hand stuff that all Christians agree on, like, maybe top tier issues. And then there's, second tier issues or theological things that you can debate on. But Israel has always been one that there's been robust debate around. And I believe me and you agree that there is biblical, foundations to supporting Israel, or at least understanding the Hebraic roots of our Christian faith, even if that doesn't spill over directly into politics. But to the point that Tucker is making, that supporting Israel as a Christian, again, that's what a Christian Zionist is, just believing you're a Christian, that's your identity, but you also believe that the Jews have a right to their ancestral homeland, is a heresy, is not found anywhere in the Bible. And again, like what you're saying is he's attacking the base of the MAGA movement, because the MAGA, Jewish base is much smaller. And so what he's doing is he's opening up his critique to a large segment of the GOP and of the MAGA voter base, which are Christian Zionists. And it's crazy to me that he hates Christian Zionists above all else, above Islamists, above communists, above fascists. Like, it is the greatest evil, apparently, according to Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, and again, it's where the charitable interpretation is he's ignorant or stupid on this issue. I think the honest one is he's misrepresenting. But yeah, heresy, as you mentioned, I recommend that Driscoll video as well, has a technical definition. And within broad Christianity, so small O Orthodox, like Catholics, Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, all these things, there's a lot of debates, a lot of things up for issue. No, none of those groups calls this a heresy. There's a variety of opinions on it, but in the same way that there's debates about end times, all these other things, it's just not accurate that anybody thinks it's a heresy. He's self-described himself before as an Episcopalian, which is also at this point tragically like barely part of Christianity. If you look at like the top leadership when it comes to Orthodox views, he also self-reportedly for years has said he's like barely Christian. Like he said recently that he only read the Bible actually like
2 years
substantively
ago.
for the first time 2 years ago, and yet now he's again proclaiming what it actually means to have a Christian heresy. Again, these two men, not biblically grounded, not Christian, not conservative, not authentically masculine, telling everyone else who's masculine, who's leading things well, who's heretics, all of these things. It's profoundly unself-aware if you were to take it innocently, but it's actually just, like Fuentes at least admits, I came in to co-opt, take over this thing and change it.
He says it out loud, the quiet part out loud. Yeah.
Yeah, and Tucker at least is more subtle about how he tries to indicate it.
Yeah.
But again, with no authority, using terms wrong, just mislabeling things. Again, you can hate Christian Zionism or think it's bad or whatever, but you can't call it a heresy. I think it's wrong in your heart if you feel that strongly about it, but nobody could ever claim that he's accurately using that term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so interesting. First, just to pick up on, they use the term neoconservative, which I would not describe us as neoconservatives. I would just describe us as conservative. So they're trying to say that there's a new conservatism that then was somehow, co-opted by the Jews and the Zionists. So that's one. And then two, when they talk about identity politics, it's funny because if you've listened to a true conservative like me or you talk, we very rarely dissect the party into different polities or identity cleavages. It's this new right that identifies you based off of your ethnicity. So are you Jewish? Are you white? Are you, multicultural? Are you an immigrant? Right. So they're the ones who segment you off based off of your ethnicity or your religion. And they, again, have created this grievance-based politic where the white Christian male is the disenfranchised segment of the population, which is being harmed by this neoconservative agenda. So really, they are pushing a grievance-based identity politic, just like the left.
Right.
So I also find that to be extremely disingenuous.
And it's so depressing that there's any use of the term right with them, because they're
Yeah.
really, they're defined negatively. They're defined by their hatreds, not by their loves. Because
Mhm.
you could say something like, what is Christian conservatism? It was white Christian males who, like William Wilberforce, pushed for the abolition of slavery, imposed it on the world, imposed it on countries of color. Very chauvinistic. They made people of color in the Barbary states and Arab nations in West Africa relentlessly over decades and decades, many lives lost, millions of dollars and British pounds spent to eradicate slavery because of a set of ideas that transcended race. They said, the most essential thing about you is you being created in the image of God, no matter your color. It is wrong for a white man to enslave a black man. It was wrong for the Barbary pirates who were Arab to enslave white people. We get the term slave going back to Slav, because at the time during the Ottoman Empire and the Barbary states, it was so ubiquitous that the people enslaved were white Slavic people that we got the word Slav into the English language. It was wrong when anyone did it, and a consistent conservative position was to eradicate that evil with a philosophical basis in Christianity for all people. Fuentes goes back and he pushes back and says, no, I'm okay with identity politics. It's just about white nationalism. It's about this
Mhm.
extremism, which has no root in
In conservatism.
anything that gave birth to Western civilization or America.
Yeah, absolutely.